The police are the janitors of capitalism. I'm going to talk about police brutality, more so the people's relationship to police and vice versa. But before I get into that, it's important that we start with a really important piece. And that is that we are not our oppression. We are not police brutality. We are not to blame. And black people are not synonymous with death. What I'm saying is that it's really important that when we think about brutality and victimization and murder, that we don't see ourselves synonymous with that. And when other people think of those things, they don't think of black people. Sometimes it's almost like, well, you know, like when you think about people doing bad, you don't think of the human condition. It's like we just think of black people, like we are the ones who do bad. And I want to begin with exploring something from history. In 1960, Hubert Humphrey and John F. Kennedy were in contest for the Democratic election of president. And Hubert Humphrey was being accused of being a draft dodger, which in that time was like the worst thing in 1960 you could call a white man in politics, that he was a draft dodger, that he was called to fight for the honor of his country and he dodged the draft. Now, of course, we know that elite people throughout American history have always avoided having to show up to military service or be drafted into war. The Kennedys devised a very interesting strategy. Robert Kennedy, John F. Kennedy's little brother, would go around everywhere going, Humphrey's a draft dodger, he's a draft dodger, he's a draft dodger. And which was kind of like flagrant to do, you know, he kind of was doing a lot to be going around and calling this cat out of his name. It lacked taste. And then JFK in return, he would go around saying, you know, my brother Robert, he's just passionate, you know, but Humphrey isn't a draft dodger. He's not a draft dodger, you know. And either way, both of them keep saying draft dodger. So imagine if you're at my house and I'm like, you're a thief. And somebody stands up in your defense and goes, oh no, you know, he's not a thief, she's not a thief. If you're the one being accused of being a thief or the one being defended to not be a thief, every time you hear your name associated with thief, you shrink in the chair. So what does it mean for black people when we constantly are sharing images, sharing messages, sharing things that are meant to be in defense of our life mattering, but actually every time we say our life matters, the image that goes out there is one that says that we don't. That we, our protest, when we throw up our hands and say, I can't breathe, or when we throw out statistics about how perilous our situation is, we kind of also are endorsing this identification with ourselves with murder and death. And that's an interesting political thing for us to figure out. How do we stand up for our right to live and liberty while at the same time not making ourselves synonymous with death? When we think about the role of police in America and their relationship to black and poor people in America, let's think about the image we normally get of the police. Normally when you see these images of the police, you know, they're the do-gooder, person that wants to help, the brave, courageous individual that signs up to be a disciple of honesty and goodness and protection in the community. And you see these images. You even historically, there was always this image of the normally white, in fact, always white, male protector of America as America grew and evolved, particularly in urban areas. You see in media either this very brave perception of the police or this kind of comical, ironic police officer. And we see that in old television shows, we see it in new television shows, and of course we see it in movies. When I was a kid, they came out with RoboCop. So the police went from just being funny and brave to robotic, futuristic protectors. And then the movie was such a sensation, they did it again. And the tagline was, he's back to protect the innocent. And in that notion of protecting the innocent, the question comes up, well, there's the innocent, but then who are labeled not innocent? Who are labeled as not good or bad? They did a reboot recently, and the notion was crime has a new enemy. And there's always this juxtaposition in police narratives around good people and bad people, and the police officers are good people. Even when they do wrong, one of the first things you hear protectors of police come out and say, well, you know, they're good. There's a few bad ones, but they're good. And in general, this kind of simplification of police and it being about good people and bad people. We learn about the police role. If I say, what's the job of the police? A room full of people always say back to me eventually, to protect and serve. So the question is, to protect and serve what? The job description of the police is to protect and serve the wealth of the people. Not the people, protect and serve the wealth of the people. Well, what is wealth? Wealth is not money. Wealth is not the well-being. In a socio-political construct, wealth is property. The job description of the police being to protect and serve the property of the people and the people who have property. In America, the police are janitors of capitalism. What am I saying? I'm saying that if you look at our capitalist society, the job of the police is no different than a custodian. If you open up an area to a custodian, a land, and you say, I want you to be the janitor here, the janitor immediately is assigned to addressing trash, vermin, and people who are seen as trespassers onto that land. So, in a capitalistic society, the police are the janitors, and their role is to determine who is trash, who is vermin, and then after clearing the area, upkeeping it. Keeping the rodents in their place, away from the land, deciding what and who gets to stay and who doesn't, and use whatever tool. So the tool of the janitor may be a broom, cleaning chemicals and materials. But when it comes to police, the tool of the janitor of capitalism that he is, the tool of the cop is the gun. And as we examine police brutality, the first thing is to manage our expectation about what the role of the police are. A big part of that job requires abuse and control over the people who do not have power. There's a major racial wealth disparity in America. Even though black people attend universities, we own businesses, we contribute greatly to the consumer economy, We vote and serve in politics. We serve in the military. We're an important part of voting blocks in this country. We only own 3% of the nation's wealth. Well, if we only own 3% of the nation's wealth and the job description of the police is protect and serve the people who have wealth, we see that play out right away in our relationship with the police. If you live in the hood like where I grew up at and you call the police station is on the corner. It'll take 3 hours for them to come. They might not come at all. But if you live up in wealthy areas, no police station up there, you call the police, it's like they live in the trees. They just fall out and show up because the description of the police is to protect and serve the people who have wealth and property. And we see these brutal images that circulate through news media and on social media, which is evidence of what I'm saying. And if you imagine a rat caught in the trap that a janitor set for them, being confused, in those last moments of breath, wondering why am I in this trap? Well, that rat doesn't understand the relationship between a janitor and rodents. And it's important for anyone, no matter what your race is, that's standing up against police brutality, saying that it's wrong, that this fundamental thing is clear so we are not confused. Because if we are shocked and confused by the treatment, not only are we not able to resolve the issue, but we waste our time on a lot of laughable ideas versus really getting to the root cause of what our issue is today and historically. So what is the solution? One thing is that every organized movement in this country, whether it be a group of people, a broad organization, a city council wrestling with the issues, an oversight committee, the first fundamental question is this: what is your policy, law enforcement of this area, on deadly force? We should be scrutinizing the policy of the custodian. Because again, if all of the rodents got together and they were protesting the custodian, and they came to the principal who hires the custodian at the school and says, "Hey, principal, do you know the janitor is killing all the rodents here? We were here first." Well, the principal's attitude is, well, it's not against our regulation and rules for the janitor to kill rodents. And when you understand this, you understand why white people, Karens, call the police on you. What do when you see a mess? You call the janitor. You call the custodian. You call animal control. The view of the white mind often on black people is that we are animals. And the call, it's like if you a sighting of an animal, a stray dog that doesn't seem to belong on the street. That call that they make is to the janitors of their society, and I'll be damned if the cop doesn't show up like a dog catcher. This is very important in our assessment. So the first thing that we have to figure out is how do we call into question and then inform the policy on deadly force? What makes it illegal? What makes it unconstitutional and a violation of our human rights when brutality is waged upon us by law enforcement? There's an idea that's being called radical that I agree with the idea, but it's not radical. The idea is remove police from communities. And people go, oh, that's a radical idea. We can't remove, wait a minute. Wherever you're watching this video at, there's a side of town where you live where the police are never there. That the police are not a part of the day-to-day routine. In fact, people might go, oh, that's interesting, there's a police officer over there, what's going on? Versus some communities, the police are always there. They're occupying force in the neighborhood. So our first attitude when we hear or when we talk about defunding police or removing police from community, let's begin with understanding that that's not a radical idea, that there's communities in this country that have very little contact with the police, that the police are not at the core of how the community resolves its issues. Which brings me to my last point. Can you live without a janitor? Because what happens when the janitor is no longer a part of your environment is that you have to clean up your own messes. You have to resolve the issues that the janitor is normally called for. So before you say, I don't like this custodian, I don't like this janitor, just remember when that stain is on that wall over there, you gotta wipe up that stain. When there's an issue around safety in our homes, safety in our communities, we have to be willing to do the work that previously the janitor did. I believe we can do that, that historically we have done that. And I'm hoping that as we wrestle with this issue of police brutality in the year to come and the years after that to come, we have a clear understanding of our relationship in relationship to law enforcement and why law enforcement is presented in our community.